Thank you to those of you who have just joined. I do remember saying that we'll start at about 5 past, but I see quite a few of you have already logged on. So we'll go ahead and kick things off. Once again, I'd just like to apologize that your mics and cameras have been muted, but please feel free to pop any questions over in the chat box. Just to give you guys a little bit of an introduction or history into who I am, for those of you who I haven't met before, my name is Nadir, and I am an anatomist as well as representative for the wonderful Learning Curve family. Now, like many of you, I spent quite a few number of years studying anatomy and physiology, and that gave me a good insight into some of the struggles that students often face when trying to engage with this type of content. Now, I completely understand that anatomy and physiology might not be every student's favorite subject, but it is something that I quite like to teach as well as to explore at my own leisure. And that's why with today's little Back to Basics webinar, we'll take a look at how to use Primal to both take control of your own learning, as well as how to elevate your anatomy and physiology knowledge. Now, basically on the agenda for today, we'll keep things pretty simple by taking a look at how to access and navigate the platform as a web-based application. We'll then touch on how to develop some effective study strategies, as well as how to make use of these various self-paced learning activities. And we'll go ahead and achieve this by exploring 3 titles, starting off with Anatomy and Physiology, then jumping over to 3D real-time. We will take a look at how to create your own customized label diagrams. And then lastly, we'll then take a look at how to increase your understanding of both structural recognition and spatial awareness using the perceptual, adaptive, and learning module. Now, the main means of accessing Primal Pictures as a web-based application would be at a website known as anatomy.tv. Now, when on campus, there are 2 differences. And depending on your institution, if you're at a university, that'll be set up with the IP authentication, meaning that you'll have to be connected to the campus Wi-Fi, and that'll log you straight into the platform. Now, for those of you who are at institutions that make use of username and password, what you'll go ahead and do is make use of those details provided to you by your lecturers to go ahead and log onto the platform. Now, once again, for those of you at institutions that are set up with IP, with the different IP settings, essentially, if you want to access the platform off campus, you then have to head over to your institution's library e-resources portal and then log in using that method. If you are having some troubles accessing the platform, please go ahead and chat to either your lecturers or librarians, and they'll be able to assist. Now, we do have quite a few students over from TUT, and I am aware that you have been experiencing some issues accessing PALMs. And we'll go ahead and take a look at how to, what we'll go ahead and take a look at is how to access PALMs. And I'd also just like to highlight that a personal profile as well as a PALMs profile are quite different. But I'll go ahead and explain that when we jump over into the platform. Now, there are 2 apps available for download, specifically 3D Real-Time as well as Quizzing. And for those of you who do have access to those different titles at your institution, what you'll need to do is be logged on to the campus Wi-Fi. You can then go ahead and simply head over to either the App Store or Google Play, search for Primal Pictures, download that, and in this case, go ahead and log in. Now, the first title that we'll go ahead and explore will be Anatomy and Physiology. This is essentially your virtual textbook, and it comprises 20 modules covering all 11 systems for the human body. The Anatomy and Physiology title marries together these 2 different concepts and teaches it to you in a guided manner using a spaced learning approach. For the Anatomy and Physiology title, it comes accompanied alongside various different forms of media in the form of interactive 3D models, animations, as well as slides. And it allows you, to get a better understanding about the basic fundamental aspects of anatomy and physiology before then pushing on towards a more clinical aspect. We then have 3D real-time, and this is a 100% user-driven platform which allows you to interact with different pieces of anatomy at the level of individual structures. Now, this is one of two atlases of gross human anatomy, and this is where you'll be able to perform a virtual dissection. Now, what that simply means is, like I said before, you're able to interact with different pieces of anatomy at the level of individual structures and also create your own customized 3D model. For each of these different 3D views, you're also able to take a look at them alongside an authentic cadaveric, cadaveric image or dissection content or dissection image to then get a more realistic impression about what you would typically see when engaging with this type of content on an actual cadaver. And lastly, this is where we'll go ahead and take a look at how to create your own customized label diagrams, which can then be incorporated into your own personalized study notes. Lastly, we'll go ahead and jump over into the perceptual and adaptive learning module. Now, PALM serves a sort of dual function, but focuses on creating a customized learning experience for each student. Now, with PALMs, it focuses on two separate aspects, namely accuracy and fluency. Now, what that simply means is PALMs will test your ability to identify various pieces of anatomy from different angles, at different times, until you have confidently identified them. And that will then provide you with continuous feedback about your ability to, in this case, accurately identify each of those different anatomical structures. Now, I know there was quite a bit of information, but we'll go ahead and jump over into the platform, focusing firstly on access navigation, and then taking a look at those three titles. But before we go ahead and do that, I'd just like to point out that at the moment in the chat, I have added some information to both our social media, as well as some useful links to our new YouTube channel. Now, over on Instagram and TikTok, we have a social media channel called at anatomy_sucks. And that's where we basically just post some fun and lighthearted content about some of the struggles that you students often face. And it's also where we regularly post some updates about our future webinars. And then over on our YouTube channel, we do have some basic crash course content, which allows you to just take a look at how to navigate each of those different titles. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and stop sharing the presentation and then reshare my screen over on the homepage of Primal Pictures. Also, if you do have any questions, once again, please feel free to pop them over in the chat. Yeah. Please do let me know if my screen is appearing all good on your end, and if not, I'll go ahead and just reshare at a later stage. Now, as mentioned before, Primal Pictures is a web-based application. So we'll go ahead and jump over to anatomy.tv. There we go. Now, when first logging onto Primal Pictures, you will be prompted to log in using those specific login details if you are a username and password set up. Conversely, if you are set up with the different IP ranges, you'll then automatically be logged in. Now, when first logging onto Primal Pictures, you will be prompted to create a personal profile. For those of you who do not have a personal profile, there are some benefits associated with creating this feature, and I'll go ahead and explore that shortly. Now, over here at the little man icon, this is where we have a personal profile. Now, at the moment, I am logged into mine, and what this basically does is that it opens up, in this case, three different options, namely the ability to select an occupation, specialization, as well as these three different tabs, namely recommended, favorited, as well as any recently viewed content. Now, considering that all of you are students, what you'll go ahead and do is simply select your occupation as student, and then for your specialization, whether you're a student focusing on anatomy, nursing, or physiotherapy, once you select that specialization, every single piece of content specific to the field of study will be shifted over to your recommended window. Now, for any content that I've favorited, For example, here we can see that I've favorited the learning outcomes for medicine. I can then quickly jump over to my favorites and then re-access that specific title. Similarly, anything that I've recently viewed from the night before that I may have been studying, I can jump back to my recently viewed and then re-engage with that content. Now, Primal does offer a wide range of different media options, and you're able to simply search for that using these three tabs, namely Browse, Index, and Results. Now, for the Browse option, you're able to look for any piece of content based simply on region, those 11 systems of the human body, your preferred media option being either an explanatory movie, 3D view, slide, or animation, or simply based on those titles. I'd just like to point out that over on the far left, for each of these different titles, if you see a few of them that aren't available to you at your institution, that's simply because I am logged into my sales account at the moment. Now, next, you're also able to search for any piece of content by jumping over to the index. And this functions very similarly to that of a conventional textbook. And you can move through any of these different filters to select your preferred media option or based on title. And then taking your search function one step further, you then have the results option. Now, this is a very nice little feature added. I'm just going to go ahead and close the pancreas. And let's say we wanted to take a look at the cardiovascular system. So let's go ahead and search the heart. And in this case, we also wanted to relate, apologies, we also wanted to relate a specific feature or structure specific to the heart. So let's say the aortic valve. In this case, there we go. Now what this does is it pulls up every single piece of content specific to that structure or organ, be it a 3D view, slide, or a explanatory movie. And it then allows me to choose my preferred media option to allow me to then tailor my preferred learning style. Now let's jump back to the dashboard and go ahead and just explain some of those titles that we'll go in and take a look at. Now, once again, we'll start things off with anatomy and physiology. And like I mentioned before, this is your virtual textbook. Once you're able to master the anatomy and physiology title, many of the other different titles do function quite similarly, and it will be, it will make it quite easier to then navigate them at a later stage. Now, for today, I thought it would be quite interesting to go ahead and take a look at cardiology, and we'll stay in that trend when we jump over into both 3D real time as well as palms. My apologies for the delay on that. There we go. Perfect. Now, considering that we are anatomists, let's go ahead and do a bit of a orientation. Over on the far left, we'll have those various menu options that we'll go through shortly. In the center, we have our interactive viewing pane with our 3D model. And over on the far right, we'll have our associated explanatory text, along with the various learning objectives for each of those different topics. Now, if I just minimize this, I'd just like to point out over here that there is a search bar that allows you to find any specific piece of content within each of those various topics. But we'll start things off over here at our first little menu icon, where we have various topics or lesson plans, which have been broken down into bite-sized chunks, taking a look at teaching you the gross anatomy, microanatomy, as well as the associated physiological processes specific to the cardiovascular system. And for today, let's go ahead and jump over into the gross anatomy for the heart. Now, cardiology is something that is quite near and dear to my heart. And for example, with our 3D model, we're able to add and remove different pieces of anatomy as we move through each of those different layers to take a more focused approach on specific features. Here, in this case, here with this particular 3D model, this is taking a look at the various sulci for the heart. Now, there are those different rollover labels that do persist for any for any of the different structures. And for any particular structure, you're able to then highlight that and get a more appreciative understanding about its overall positioning and its borders. Now, if we maximize those different learning objectives, here we can see we'll first go ahead and start off with taking a look at how to better understand the positioning of the heart. So if we jump over to that first learning objective, we can then scroll down and make use of one of these predefined layers, and then use the associated explanatory text as we move through each of those different layers, exposing different pieces of anatomy to get a better understanding about the overall positioning of the heart in relation to the diaphragm. And once we've worked through some of those different learning objectives, what we would typically be greeted with is an interactive learning activity. Now, these do vary quite a bit in terms of the type of questioning, but most often than not will focus on testing your ability to identify different pieces or structures of anatomy. Now, many of these different anatomical models also come accompanied alongside either an authentic dissection image or a histological slide. And this just further helps solidify your understanding about being able to identify these different structures from a more realistic standpoint. So let's go ahead and scroll down, and we'll go ahead and jump over into this particular learning outcome. Now, as you can see with our 3D model, we're taking a look at the various chambers of the heart. And once again, we're able to add and remove different layers, taking a more focused approach at some of those finer details. But let's say we continue on, we're then greeted with an authentic dissection image. For each of these different images, there are those rollover labels that do persist once again, and you're able to select and highlight each structure to then get a better understanding about its overall positioning and its borders. And then once we've completed studying the necessary anatomy, we can then move over to something focusing more on the physiology for the human heart, such as the cardiac cycle. Now next, let's go ahead and explore some of the different menu options. Over at AZ, this is where we have our alphabetical index once again, and it functions very similarly to what we saw over on the dashboard. Next, over at the little beaker icon, this is where you'll be able to find those various interactive learning activities for each of the different topics. And then once we feel that we've confidently studied or learned each of those different learning objectives across the different topics, we then have some quizzes. Now, this is a full comprehensive quiz bank. This is a full comprehensive quiz bank encompassing each of those questions. And towards the end, you'll get a full collective to then test your understanding across each of those different topics. Now, the nice thing about these quizzes is that you are provided with some feedback about whether or not you were correct or incorrect, and allows you to then go back and take a look at which topics require more focus. Let's go ahead and maybe try one or two examples to take a look at what this would typically present as. Now, first question is asking us to go ahead and consider what forms part of the cardiovascular system. And we know that this would be the heart as well as blood. Now, if we go ahead and submit that, then we can see we've gone and excluded one of the particular answers, and we're presented with that feedback. Now, next, in this case, if we go ahead and select the correct answer by indicating what the following substances would be delivered by the cardiovascular system, in this case, we know that's going to be oxygen. In this case, we've also selected an insufficient amount, and then we're provided with that necessary feedback. Next, let's go ahead and just close that off, and then take a look at how to apply this information towards a more clinical standpoint. And this has been achieved over here at the little heart icon. And this is where we'll find some information relating to various clinical cases, such as here, there we go. Such as for this example, we have a incidence for ischemic heart disease, otherwise known as coronary artery disease. Now, for this example, we're greeted with a full overview for both causes, symptoms, diagnosis, treatment, alongside a nice image that provides us with what we would typically see when assessing this condition from a more clinical or realistic standpoint. Next, there are those various associated changes that do occur to our anatomy and physiology as we age, and this just helps solidify our understanding about the associated changes that occur. Lastly, forcing us to think even more critically, we then have those different case studies. Now, if we go ahead and select, for example, hypertension, What we're first greeted with is a little bit of an explanation. And here we have a 65-year-old female who unfortunately suffers with hypertension. And for each of these questions, and then test us to think more critically about the information that we previously engaged with in order to assess our understanding of how the anatomy and physiology will be affected as a result of each of these different conditions. Now, over here at the star icon, as you can see, I'd just like to highlight this particular section. And this is where we're able to save and favorite content to be accessed offline. As I mentioned over on the homepage, there were some benefits with creating a personal profile. Now, because I'm logged into my personal profile, any content that I save or favorite will then be stored to the cloud. And that then allows me to access any piece of content from any device at any time. Now, if I wasn't logged into my personal profile, I would then only be able to save or favorite this content to my browser, allowing me to only access this content from the device that I've previously saved it on. So in this case, once again, I implore you to go ahead and create that personal profile. In this case, to be able to access the content at any time. Considering that load shedding is back in full swing, having the ability to access this content at your own leisure is quite important. You're then able to simply share this content as a link. There's also the embed function, which is more suitable to that of your lecturers. And once again, with load shedding being back in full swing, you're also able to download this content. Now, because we're currently, in this case, because we currently have a video open, you're able to simply save it as a movie, topic text, or topic PDF. Now, I highly implore that you go ahead and save it as a topic PDF, because what this does is that it then merges some of those different anatomical views in a two-dimensional format alongside the associated explanatory text. Now, just before I go ahead and show you an example, over in the menu option, over at the gear icon, these are just some settings that allows you to customize your user interface. But let's go ahead and see what this would present with as we save a topic PDF. Now, as mentioned before, this will then combine the explanatory text alongside some of those 3D views in a more 2D format. And it just creates a more engaging learning style instead of looking at a simple text format. Now that goes and apologies. So I'm just having a bit of technical issues. There we go. Now that goes and finishes off with the anatomy and physiology title. Next, let's jump over into 3D real time. And sticking along the trend of cardiology, we'll jump over into the thorax. This may take some time to load, so my apologies for that. There we go, perfect. So I'm just going to minimize these different 3D views and orientate ourselves once again. Over on the far left, we'll have those different menu options. In the center, we'll have our interactive viewing pane or our virtual dissection table with our 3D model. And then over on the far right, we'll have each of those different categories to select from in order to create our own customized 3D model. Now, 3D real time is where we're able to perform a virtual dissection, as well as where we're able to create our own customized label diagrams that we can incorporate into our later study notes. So firstly, what I'm going to go ahead and do is just close or clear my main viewing pane. My apologies, not main viewing pane, my virtual dissection table. There we go. So let's jump over into the heart and take a look at how to construct our own customized 3D model. Now, firstly, we do have some pre-made layers, but just before we select one of them, I'd just like to illustrate that you are able to construct your own customized model by selecting any individual structure that you so choose to take a look at. But what we'll do is take a look at adding in the full anatomy for the heart, and then jumping over and adding some various veins as well as arteries. Let's go ahead and add in some of the coronary sinuses, some of the pulmonary veins. Let's jump over into the arteries. And let's add in, not that. Let's add in some coronary arteries and the artery of the aorta, brachiocephalic trunk. And there we go. Now, if we zoom in, once again, we have those different little over labels that do persist for any structure. And we're able to completely rotate our model of full 360 degrees to take a look at different pieces of anatomy from any angle. But let's say we wanted to gain some context about each of these different structures. Now, for example, if we go ahead and select the right ventricle, we can then click over at the text box to give us some explanatory information about its overall position and structure. Now, in this case, what we'll go ahead and take a look at when we perform a virtual dissection is the ability to then visualize the rigid muscular walls or the trabecular carne located within the right ventricle. But before we do that, for each of these different highlighted words, if we go ahead and select them, and then highlight that appropriate structure, and allows us to get a better understanding of both spatial awareness as well as structural identification or recognition of the right ventricle in relation to both the right atrium and the pulmonary trunk. Now, down below, there are some associated media, and these will either be other 3D views or the authentic dissection content, which we'll go ahead and explore shortly. So if I minimize that text box, and then jump over to the little window icon. Now, this is where we have some of those various dissection content, as well as the pre-made models. We'll go ahead and select a similar example to what we saw over in Anatomy and Physiology by taking a look at a dissection for the right ventricle. If we go ahead and select this model, and then half maximize our 3D model, as we can see, now we have our digital twin or 3D model alongside the authentic dissection content. And this is very important for students to be able to better visualize the exact anatomy to gain a more realistic impression about what you would typically see when engaging with a cadaver during a dissection. Now, for any structures you do highlight on either your 3D model or the authentic dissection content, it'll then mirror each of the different pieces of anatomy that you interact with to allow you to then accurately identify each of the different structures. Now, as you can see, the right ventricle has been dissected, and we're able to visualize both the tricuspid valve, the chorda tendineae, as well as some of the different papillary muscles. And this is where we'll go ahead and take a look at how to perform a virtual dissection. Now, if we go ahead and select the right ventricle, we're able to gain some context about its overall positioning and take a look at its borders, as well as what structures may lie in relation to it, such as various coronary arteries. And if we go ahead and select inspect, we can then rotate the right ventricle and now better visualize those rigid muscular walls or the trabecular carne that we saw over in the text box. If we deselect that, we can then examine simply the right ventricle, and that will then turn every other structure except for the right ventricle into X-ray mode and allows us to appreciate its borders. Next, if we go ahead and just deactivate examine, we can then ghost that structure, and it'll simply turn the right ventricle into X-ray mode. And then we're able to better visualize some of those finer details, such as the tricuspid valve and the chorda tendineae. And if we want to interact with them, we can then completely remove or hide them. And now we're able to engage with those finer structures. Perfect. I'm just going to go ahead and minimize this. And we'll make use of one of the pre-made models in the form of the cluster of the heart. There we go. Now, as you can see, with this model, it's been nicely color-coded with our arteries being red, veins being blue, and nerves being yellow. Now, unfortunately, the human body isn't exactly color-coded, and it can be quite difficult to often visualize these structures on a cadaver. And this is where Primal has added the amazing feature of being able to activate the cadaveric colors. For those of you who have engaged with some cadaveric content, I'm sure that this image may look quite familiar. Now, this then creates a more realistic impression about what you would typically see see, and forces you to think more critically about where these structures lie in relation to one another. So for example, let's go ahead and remove some of the different pieces of anatomy, specifically the subepicardial fat. And let's say you were tasked with being able to identify the location of the coronary arteries. What this does is that it then forces you to think more critically about where these structures lie in relation to one another, as well as the overall course and the origin. So if I go ahead and reactivate those colors, once again, over at the little star icon, you're able to save and favorite any of these different 3D views or custom models that you've made. And I do suggest that you go ahead and make use of some of these different pre-made models, just because it can be quite difficult to first create your own customized model when you're not used to engaging with 3D real time. Next, if we jump over to the little pencil and ruler icon, this is where we start trading into the domain of creating your own customized label diagrams. You're able to add any pins and labels into any structure that you can see, as well as add a freestanding text box to then add whatever you want to. So if we jump over to the text box, we can simply copy some of that information and insert it into our freestanding text box. Let's go ahead and just name this heart. And if I just add another pin, I'm then able to remove, well, apologies for that one. There we go, able to do that. What I can do is then remove some of the information and then type any question I want, such as let's go ahead and identify. And now I can, in this case, and now I'm able to self-test myself about being able to identify different pieces of anatomy. And then you're also able to simply highlight any particular structure of interest or draw a free, in this case, or make use of the free draw tool to follow the course, for example, of any arteries, nerves, or veins. Then jumping next to the little camera icon, you can take a quick snapshot. I'm just going to once again name this heart. I won't add that to my favorites. Select OK. I'll then be prompted to download that. There we go. And what you'll see is you'll have your customized label diagram, which will pop up in your downloads, regardless of the type of PC that you're using. And you're then able to incorporate this into your own customized label study notes. Perfect. And then lastly, once again, you're simply able to share any piece of content as a link and a navigational trackpad. Now, I know there was quite a bit of information, but we'll jump over into the last title. And I'm sure that this is something that many students, specifically over at TUT, were most excited about exploring. Now, the perceptual and adaptive learning module, like I mentioned before, the ability to log into Palms requires an independent username and password. Now, for today, as this opens shortly, this might take a second. Oh, okay. So in this instance, I am logged into my profile, but just to explain what this entails is that when you first log into Palms, you'll be prompted to create an independent profile. Now, what you'll need to go ahead and do is type in your institutional email address and then select your own password. Now, it is preferred that you go ahead and use the exact same information that you use to create your personal profile, because that'll then allow both your personal profile as well as your recently created Palms profile to talk to one another. And that then focuses or allows the system to customize your learning experience specific to you as the individual. And in this case, because I'm already logged into Palms, And because I've selected my specialization as an anatomy student, I'll go ahead and jump over into that. And once again, we'll take a look at cardiology by jumping over into the thorax and then selecting any one of the different sections or different pieces of anatomy specific to the cardiovascular system. And we'll jump over into the heart chambers and pericardia. Now, there are two aspects associated with POMS, namely the assessment and learning aspect. With the learning aspect, this then times, my apologies, what this does is, like I mentioned before, it focuses on testing both accuracy as well as fluency. Accuracy being a measurement of whether or not you were correct or incorrect, and fluency being a measurement of the time it takes for you to effectively answer that question. Once we've done and explored learning, we'll then jump over and take a look at the assessment option and then explain some of the different insights and scores and how to interpret this from your own understanding. There we go. So in this case, we won't pick up where we left off. Oh, there we go. Don't know how I did that. Let's go ahead and pick up where we left off. Now, POMS will test your understanding of being able to identify different pieces of anatomy 3 times from 3 different angles. Now, with a particular structure that's been highlighted, we have various options to select from. Now we can see that, okay, so in this case, because we were not quick enough to answer, our time's run up. And what we're presented with is the correct answer for that particular structure. Let's go ahead and continue. Now we can accurately see that the overall angle as well as structure has changed. Now we can go ahead and see that that is the left ventricle. So let's go ahead and select that. Oh, sorry, my apologies. In this case, I was incorrect in this instance. But we're provided with that particular feedback about what the correct structure would be. And now for this particular question, we can see that it is one of the specific pericardia. But once again, let's go ahead and select Thomas pericardium, which we know is incorrect when provided with that continuous feedback. As you can see, because we were incorrect quite a few times, we're provided with that necessary feedback. Next, let's go ahead and jump over into the assessment option. I do see that we are quite pressed for time. So let's just go ahead and move through a couple examples. Let's go ahead and select the right ventricle. And then the left ventricle. Now, the major difference that I'd like to point out is that as we saw with the learning aspect, we were provided with some feedback about whether or not we were correct or incorrect. We've previously answered 2 questions in the assessment option, but haven't been provided with that feedback about whether or not we were incorrect or correct. And towards the end, once we've completed this particular assessment option, we're then presented with some feedback towards the end that we can take a look at in the assessment and insight score. Now down below, as we can see, I've gone ahead and finished 5 different sessions, as well as the total time that I've spent. Now, for the different categories I've viewed, that'll then be for the heart chambers and pericardia. And now it's telling me that I've only mastered 1 category out of those 8, which means I would definitely have to go back and re-explore the heart chambers and pericardia, practice my identification of those different structures, and then reassess myself at a later stage. There we go. Let's just go ahead and do a bit of a summary about what we took a look at. We first focused on how to access Primal Pictures as a web-based application at anatomy.tv. We then discussed the benefits of creating a personal profile, followed by how to search for content using some of the different options over on the dashboard. We then did a title overview, jumping over into Anatomy and Physiology, where we took a look at how to download each of those different PDFs, as well as how to create a more spaced learning approach using some of those various learning objectives. We then jumped over into 3D real time, where we took a look at how to perform a virtual dissection and create our own customized label diagrams. And lastly, we jumped over into PALMS, where we explored both the learning and assessment option and how it creates a customized learning experience tailored to meet your own individual needs. I'm just going to go ahead and stop sharing my home screen and then jump back into the meeting. And I hope you all enjoyed some of the content that we did go ahead and present today. And if there are any questions, once again, please feel free to go ahead and pop them in the chat. And I implore you guys to go ahead and explore the platform at your own leisure. Primal is quite intense, and the only way to go ahead and the only way to go ahead and make sure that you are able to improve your anatomy and physiology is to continuously practice. So thank you all for attending today's session. I hope you enjoyed, and we'd love to hear your feedback.